We'll do you'll tell us what they are. So, the first, second slide.
Naren has a little slideshow.
Okay, yeah. So this is what is on the BCAM.
Let's see.
Corsi forward, Corsi backward, flanker, recall. Fluency is on the BCAM, but it didn't survive, and one of our self-report measures. So that's just to say this is the list. Now,
Okay.
Naren has her presentation.
It's nothing formal. It's just like
That's
some
perfect.
screenshots.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm just gonna go through all the tasks one by one quickly.
No, that's my computer.
Doesn't work.
Okay.
It's talking about the video.
Hold on. Okay.
Okay, so the BCAM we do it 4 times, once every 9 months, and there are different tasks. The first task is a reaction time kind of task. So basically, the participant has to look at the screen, focus the eyes on crosses on the middle of the screen. Then, as soon as they see a red square, they have to hit the space bar as fast as possible. So basic reaction time kind of task. So that's the first one. Yeah. Okay. The second one is a memory kind of test. It's 2 parts. The first part is the learning. So the computer says 8 words, a list of 8 words to the participant. Participant doesn't see the words, only listens to them, and then they have to repeat the words. And we do this 3 times so that they learn the words. So there are 3 versions of the words. So here there's the 3 versions for different visits, and we can go back. And here, as when the participant says the words, we just click on them, and then whatever we ask them to keep them in mind for later. So that's the memory learning. After that, we have the Corsi. So here again, the participant is gonna focus the eyes. Sorry, flanker. Why did I say Corsi? Oh my God. The flanker. Sorry. And the participant is gonna focus the eyes on a cross in the middle of the screen again. The cross disappears, and we see 5 arrows. Always look at the one in the middle. If the arrow points to the left, then they click on left. If the middle arrow points to the right, then they press the right arrow on the keyboard. And again, they have to press it as fast as possible, and obviously try to not make mistakes. After that, we have the trail. So it's on a paper for this one. Basically, we have just 3 versions for this too. And the participant has to draw a line that joins all the circles on the sheet, and always alternating between a number and a letter, with following the ascending order of numbers and the alphabetical order. So after that, we go back to the memory, and we ask the participant to recall the words they learned previously. And again, for this time, they don't listen to them anymore. They just have to spontaneously recall them. And once they say them, we click on them again. And after that, whatever they don't remember, we give them hints for. So, and here we have like 2 kinds of words. There are concrete words and abstract words. For the concrete words, we give them a hint about the category. And if they don't find it, again, we give multiple choice. Or for the abstract words, there's no category for that, but we give them a multiple choice for the answer. Yeah, so that's the Corsi. So for the Corsi, there is a forward and backward version. They see 9 blocks on the screen, and the blocks are going to light up in a certain order. Once it's done, so like here we have kind of an example. The first screen, second, and third, they just look, and then once it's done, they have to click on the, thank you, Christine, on the squares that lit up in the same order. And every time they complete the trial, the sequence gets longer. For the backwards, well, I took the same example, but then they would need to start with the last one and go back to the first one. And that's it. Now the shape to back. This is a little bit sometimes harder to explain to participants, but basically they see shapes one at a time on the screen, and they have to press on the spacebar as soon as they see a shape that they saw two shapes before. So this is sometimes tough to understand, but anyway. So that's it for this one. There's the verbal fluency. So they have 1 minute to give as many words as possible that start with the letter that we give them. There's 3 forms, FAS for English, PLS for French. It's different visits, and they cannot say proper names or names that are from the same family. Otherwise, they can say any other kind of words, just like in the example here. And finally, the Tower of London. So we show the participants like 3 posts with different lengths and 3 balls with different colors. We show them a pattern that they have to copy. So with 3 rules. So the first rule is that they cannot move more than 1 ball at a time. Second rule, they cannot put the balls anywhere but on the post. And the last rule is that the first post takes 3 balls, the second one 2, and the last one just 1. And they put just at the end 1 example of what it looks like. This is the first trial. So they show the pattern on top, and then you have to repeat it to copy it on the bottom. And they always have to look on the top right how many moves they're allowed to make. That's it.
So maybe you could just say what a bit about the background of why these particular tests ended up in this. I could tell you where they came from. Let me see what it looks like. How long does it take to do it with the average participant?
About 40 minutes.
Okay. So the goal would be to end up with something shorter. That started. So it started off with even more of a hodgepodge of a combination of things like the MOCA, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, so bedside types of tests, plus some of the ones that are still in the battery now that are kind of typical neuropsych tests, but in the kind that are readily administered quickly, like the Corsi, for example, and Fluency, and that are also used from my point of view as a bedside test. And then in an initial version now, years ago, right, many years ago, we had a whole bunch of computerized frontal executive types of tasks that were that I pulled out of my own experimental kind of program that were totally not standardized tests of any kind. That included the two-back in a different version and the flanker, because we were originally under the impression that HIV-associated neurocognitive troubles were frontal executive in nature, and so that was why we pulled a bunch of those in to see if they might add something. And then we went through now several iterations of analysis of pilot data, sample sizes of 80, 100 to 103 times, to end up with dropping and adding tasks, end up with this list. And the idea was that this is far from done, and I guess we'll see how it turns out. And that we were aiming to eventually be shorter than 40 minutes, and to be some of the reasons we selected the tasks we did and that we used things that were slightly unconventional in some cases was that we wanted to end up with things that were in the public domain that we could then package into freely available battery in the long run. That's why we didn't follow generally traditional neuropsych tests that are generally not in the public domain and require often a particular training to administer. So we're also aiming for things that could be administered by clinical staff, potentially nurses or, God help us, physicians, or research assistants without needing more than that. So that was the logic behind it. And then in some versions of this, there was also an effort to ask if self-report items from various self-report sources about cognitive difficulties could be included in the same set or not. And I guess Nancy's going to speak to that in a second, how that turned out. So, I mean, the domains, the cognitive domains that are assessed by the task that Niran just reviewed, one can debate exactly what domains. For sure, they have processing speed and executive functions of various kinds and working memory and some straight up declarative memory mainly. So they kept kind of that frontal executive flavor with some memory thrown in, basically empirically, and then we'll see. Well, we'll see now in a second what should stay in there. One of the problems, well, one thing to talk about at the end is some of these things are more or less amenable to being computerized. So my intention is to move it towards something that's entirely computerized, and for now it's a bit of a mixed bag while we're working out what's worth doing and what's not. Anyway.
Okay, so my task was to show the evolution of the BCAM and where we are now, and its scoring algorithm based on a large sample size, about 500 done once and another 100 or so done twice, and we haven't presented the people done 3 times, so we'll show you some data on 1 and 2. Now, I mean, I've given a couple of talks on RASH, but I know that, people some are new and haven't heard the usual speak, so I don't have a RASH talk. But what I'll tell you is that what we're trying to do is we're trying to fit data on neuropsychological tests representing a domain that we're calling cognitive ability to an underlying model. That's a hierarchical model, meaning that some people have less ability and some people have more ability. And the assumption of this approach is that there is a single latent trait, underlying latent trait, that we're calling cognitive ability. And that certain tests will fit this underlying theoretical, hierarchical, linear model better than others, but that the items, the tests that are chosen, really have some reason for them to be there. They're driven by theory. They're not just somebody made them up and, so it's a methodology that links theory and math to try and define the latent, to quantify the latent traits. And as you know, latent traits are things that are not directly observable. You can only sample behaviors and say, oh, I think your cognitive ability is excellent because you passed 7 tests. I mean, our cognitive ability is not necessarily only driven by 7 tests, so you sample. So the idea is that this is a good sampling of tests, of an infinite number of tests that people could invent or, could ever have existed. So one of the challenges with this type of data, RASH analysis is normally used for what we call ordinal data, often questionnaire data, where things come in ordered categories. People answer a questionnaire 0, 1, 2, or from education where you got the right answer or the wrong answer, and it's based on assigning ability based on the proportion of people who passed. So if very few people pass an item, it's a hard item. If everybody gets it, it's an easy item. So if you pass an easy item, it doesn't mean you have a huge amount of ability. What the challenge here in this data is that these come as continuous scores. A lot of them are timed, or they're numbers of words you get right, or they're error rates, or they're some such other thing. So the ordinality, obviously, because they're continuous scores, there is an ordinality. So it's not so much the ordinality that we're worried about, but we need to be able to sort of get units, jumps along the continuum such that, if your reaction time was, 0.1 millisecond, is that, what's the next jump? It might be, 0.5 or, or 10 or something. So what you have to do is you take the distribution in your data and you look to see how many categories, equal categories, would that distribution support. So we try and fit the most number of, jumps in the data. We would like to have every single number, but of course then it's ridiculous, and the difference between 0.1 and 0.2 has got no value. So what you see here is the number of categories that survived, meaning that we probably started many with 10 or even more. But in general, we would start with 10. In some other types of applications, sometimes we may get 20. But you start with what the distribution can support, meaning you don't want 2 people in each cell, in each category. So you want some number. So when you look at the different tests, we were able to fit these variables to the underlying theoretical model. But one of the things that you will see is that the fluency, that FAS, did not fit, and I'll show you why. So we could get 7 different categories of the course C forward to fit, and 7 course C backwards. And the flanker congruent, we could get 10. Now the flanker, from my understanding, has a congruent, a discongruent, incongruent, and some ratio or some difference.
Yeah.
So you can already see just from first principles of measurement that when you have 2 variables, one derived from the other, they're clearly correlated. And what happens if you allow them to fit into your latent trait? Their psychometric properties are not independent, and you get a false feeling of how well one's performing because it's driven a little bit by the other. So in general, in RASH, you don't want to have items that are too correlated. And so what happened is that when we first started, we just had the flanker difference, and it wouldn't fit. It was horrible. It wouldn't fit. And then, of course, we realized this is why it's, it's good to do this thing when you have like all the brains in the room at the same time, is that it was really the congruent and the incongruent. So what happened is that we could only get that flanker congruent to fit. We tried to fit the incongruent after fitting the congruent by trying to make it other configurations and even a binary, like, okay, add a little bit at the top. That's even something at the, making it a binary, very low, just discriminating between any level and the very high level, and it just would not fit that latent trait with these animals in the model. And the latent trait is defined by what you put in, and that's why it has to be theoretically driven, and you put in things that make sense. So the thing that's great for the first up to 2 back is we really got a lot of granularity. So, you can already see that there's like 30 more jumps, we call thresholds, in these items. So it gives you on an idea of a ruler, there's lots of gradations along that ruler, which is very good for change. And because of the RASH model, these gradations have mathematical meaning on a continuum. So the trail test, we could only get it as to have 2 categories. It arrives at 2 categories. It arrives at 2, fine. So, okay, good.
Correct or incorrect?
Incorrect or correct, fine. So there's a test. So then, talking about, doing something, how long does it take? And you get 2 categories, fine. Fluency didn't work. Now that's the FAS. And there's a number of reasons, administrative reasons why it doesn't fit. There are things it's done, as I understand, not on the computer, it's oral, somebody counts the words. You guys will tell me more about why we had problems.
Education and language sensitive,
yeah.
Age sensitive, in very complicated ways perhaps.
Right. So, and we did have some administrative issues about trying to do it. So one of the nice things about RASH is that it's used to detect anomalies in the data. So this was an anomalous situation. Theoretically, it should have fit, but it didn't fit. And so, yes, you found out there's administrative errors. We also found out that there are fewer words in P in French than there are in F in English. So, this causes a little bit of issues. Anyway, we could not, it's not in. It didn't survive. After we fit the neuropsychological test, and as some of you will know, our first pass at the BCAN is we wanted to have all sources of data in the model. We felt that the latent trait was not defined by the source of the data. A true latent trait, doesn't matter where the data comes from, it's measuring cognitive ability. And we put in what we call self-report measures. There's, self-report performance. It fit in our first pass. But in our second pass at a much larger sample, it was clearly a separate construct. It was negatively correlated with all the other constructs, and it made a construct to a certain extent on its own. So we said this is complicated enough, and we are swimming against the stream. It's just me who likes the self-report. And since I drive the computer sometimes, then who has the mouse has the power. So we said, let's do our best with the neuropsychological test. And then after we have a model, we said, could we fit some of the self-report? And the reason it's there is because it's much easier to ask somebody a question than to do a test in order to fit them. Even the easy trail. I can't imagine, you know, you busy doctor giving a trail test to somebody to figure out if they should send them on for further neuropsychological testing. So we put in the one, and this was the question that worked well. Forget the date unless you looked it up. It's a very common question. It can be verified by other people. You know, if you don't believe the patient, you don't have to. You can give them a, you know, what is it, write the date down. And so it fit. There's some other details. So we didn't put any of the other PROs in there.
What happened to the Tower of London?
You told me it never got in.
I don't get scores for the.
I wasn't aware we were administering it.
Right.
I skipped this one when I get to look here.
Oh.
Because she didn't score them, because we, no.
So, I mean, we should fish it out and look.
Yeah.
So I had no idea. I thought we decided that we weren't administering it. It takes forever, and it was a nuisance to program.
Takes about, 5 minutes.
Right.
So money just they kept the patients love it. That was you. Speaking of who controls the mouse.
Yeah.
We come back to the Tower of London.
It is in the other set of tests that comes from Erica. Everybody else.
Yes. Yes.
It is in that section.
Yeah, but we have also had in the new council.
But we, but
He didn't want it.
right.
Well, we can try it. I have nothing against seeing whether it fits in the step here. I just thought we decided to shorten, to keep it less than half an hour, the whole thing, we tried to shorten it.
I thought it was like,
reliability. Okay, anyway, that's why we're meeting now. 600 patients.
Good idea, yeah. But you know, the other thing, even though we have created, you know, a single value for cognitive ability using all these tests in their raw form still exist. So the data can be mined.
Yeah.
You know, each test separately, you know, just because we've created a latent doesn't mean that. You can't look at the individuals, and we're hoping to have a whole slew of graduate students who would be just wanting to unpack that box.
Right.
Okay, so, where? Oh, sorry, this one, I've got it. Yeah. So this is essentially what comes out of RASH, and what it shows you is along the horizontal axis is essentially the values of the latent trait, and they're pretty much you know, standardized to have a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 1. So people who are used to dealing with standardized measures, it's quite nice for people who are used to that kind of format. But and the units are logic, but it's exactly the same interpretation. So, you know, ideally you want a measure that has a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 1. And along the latent trait, you can see the distribution of the items and the threshold. So, for example, that thing at the top, core C forward, you can see it's got 7 different thresholds where you pass from 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 1 to 3, and you can see that it covers very nicely the entire spectrum. So if you were really pressed, you could just do one test. You pretty much know, you know, grosso modo where they were along that spectrum by administering one test. Now, it wouldn't be very precise, but, you know, it wouldn't be awful. And so in the blue is really at the lowest level. These people have little ability, and you can see we're not really good at distinguishing how terrible you are. But that's never what we're interested in. You're always really interested in people. How good are they? Because we want to detect people that move away from being excellent to very good. That to us is not a good sign. And so we don't have a lot of precision on how bad somebody is.
We don't have any people down there.
We have no people down there. Yeah.
People, which is, I mean, that's the point. Like,
yeah.
If the people out there, there's no point in measuring them.
No, and we purposely targeted people that didn't have frank problems. But as you see, if you move along the middle of the latent trait, you can see there's lots of thresholds there. So we're really good at measuring people there, and there's a lot of people there, which we'll show you later. So this just shows that, and everything is ordered. You see the thresholds go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 to 8. So this is just a little map that helps us understand, you know, how well we're measuring people. So what you get out of RASH is essentially, this is an ideal output because it shows on the top are the distribution of the people in pink, and on the bottom along the latent trait, the value of the latent trait, which goes from -3 to +3, are the items. And what RASH does is it allows you to get an item difficulty and a person ability that can be estimated simultaneously. And you know, quite often what we've lived through in educational testing is that somebody gets 100% because they got an easy test, and somebody failed because they got a hard test. Well, this doesn't allow this. This is they're linked. So what you see on the top is a very nice normal distribution. That's called the information curve. And it says we have a lot of information in the middle of the pack. And it's not quite 0. It is, in fact, the mean, and you can see, I don't know if I have something that points to the mean. Yes. The mean is up here. The mean is 0.5455, and the standard deviation is 0.45. And you can see, so that on average, people scored about 0.54, and you can see the items. So we do have some items here. There's no people here. And we still have some hard items, but there aren't any people there. So one of the things that's not as happy, am I making you ill, Lisa? Is that there's a metric called the Person Separation Index, which meaning how well do we discriminate against groups of people? And because our population is so concentrated in the middle, we're not excellent at discriminating across these bands here. We'd like to have something above 0.8. It's similar to what you're probably used to in a Cronbach's alpha, but it's a little bit different. And we have only a little bit greater than 0.6. So the issue is that I don't think it's a fault of the items. I think it's our people are very homogeneous.
I think something else. I think that what's happening up here, there isn't actually independence between your people and your items because you had to set your thresholds based on how many people fell in each area. So if you had enough people up there or enough people down there, you would get more thresholds, and you'd get a lot. Your information function would change totally.
So if we
because you had to collapse categories.
But we have very few people in categories.
That's what I mean. Like
yeah. But then we would
if you don't need to measure them
right.
at all, if you're not worried about having to measure those people at the extreme, that's fine.
But they would get collapsed.
But because you had to collapse categories with small frequencies. By definition, you're going to have.
We had to collapse the continuous variables into categories.
Yes.
Yeah.
And because you would have had to collapse, you know, you're going to have fewer thresholds. That's why you've got lots of nice thresholds clumps in the middle, and not so much going on up there. Because there you had to collapse more.
Yeah. But you'll see some of our curves. We actually didn't collapse. We actually said you'll see some of them. You'll actually say even though you could have if you were wearing our parsimonious hat. Just show you some of the things we did not. I said this fine, keep it. Keep the granularity. But I
get you a parsimonious hat.
Yeah. I just think that the and we know from our studies that we by design did not have people with severe cognitive problems. And in Montreal, we were able to identify, to a certain extent, the cognitive status of people who did not agree to be in the study. We have a less than 50% response rate.
Everybody. We approach everybody.
Yeah.
We're supposed to do.
And we had less than 50% response rate. That's fine. That's quite typical.
I think another way to put it is that we had almost 50% response.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Very
Yeah. The glass is half full. Yeah. The people who did not participate in the study is a very typical group. They were working, they were busy, and they did not report any cognitive difficulties, which to me would make sense. They were all working, and so we don't have a lot of people at the high end either, because 50% of them didn't even agree to be in the study. So I think and it would be great for Lisa to come and sit with Susan and look, at some of the, at the RASH. But one of a priori, we tried not to collapse categories.
It'd be great to get some of the people who said no to come and do the test.
Yes, wouldn't that be great?
They would fill in the top.
So the important thing is that the mean is 0.54 and the standard deviation is 0.45, then you'll have to remember that because I'm going to show you later on some regression coefficients. So it's going to be a test as to what is the meaning of the regression coefficient, and you have to remember the standard deviations. This just shows you how the items are distributed, the thresholds are distributed. So if you look at the Corsi backwards, it's in light blue. So you can see it doesn't come in until here. And then it comes in here, here, here. And this is why I said this one, you know, covers the spectrum, but it's not very good down here. So if you're worried about somebody not being great, you have to be at least around above minus 0.9. So, Corsi forward, this is the PDQ date, and you can see it's really at the lower end. So, you know, maybe that's something that since we don't have much at the lower end, there's something at the lower end. It did not really help at the higher end. So it just kind of, it's all color-coded to essentially say, these are all little steps. They're all tiny little steps, and it gives you the idea of how many steps there are.
So the PDQ date, the 4 steps are, you can answer, the question is something like, I forget the, sometimes forget, or I forget the date if I don't look it up. Never, sometimes,
often, all
always.
the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the Q1 would be always forget the date.
That's an old slide because it's not split by any.
The next one's split.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So one of the things we talked about split was that there was what we call a problem by age. It's called differential item functioning, is that older people answer this question at a different level given the latent trait. So people with more ability will respond at a lower level. And so it had to be split by age so that if the person's over 55 and they score a certain value, they get a different value. But you don't have to worry about it. It's part of the scoring algorithm. You know,
well, you do if you're using it as a screening question.
If you're using it as your screening question, yeah. But your screening question, you would be given it, right? You would be given the scoring. It would say, this is where you are. This is to show you a little bit of how we deal with this granularity. So this is perfect. This is the Corsi, and this shows the probability of getting, you know, of responding to this item. And this is a very low end, and if you're very poor, you'll get that, you know, the probability of responding to this is very high, and it'll go down. And what you want to see are unique probability trajectories for every one of the response options. Now, we've chunked these response options ourselves. So you can see we have, you know, I mean, there might be a little bit of fuss here, but we're not trying to get something perfect. We're trying to retain it as much granularity as we can. So this shows that this is a pretty well-performing item. This is the flanker congruent. Now, it's not as well-performing, but all of the items are ordered. So we decided not to just create 3 categories. You know, in other applications, people could have just said, okay, I'm just lumping all this mess in the middle. But they were at least ordered. And so we kept it, our rule was to try and keep as much granularity as possible because we were worried about the person separation index. And in fact, we did gain some by keeping the granularity. But here was an example of this FAS, that word recall. It's not even ordered. So it's, and you know, you see this, you work through it, you might get a binary, but we couldn't even get a binary. And in fact, the whole thing was ruining our latent trait. Once we just a priori took it out, all the other items fell into place. So this was an early decision. It was so disordered, we could not. What disordered means, it means when you're higher on the latent trait, you scored worse on the FAS. So it was all backwards.
So you're higher than the latent trait in the sense you've done well on other tests.
Yeah.
You've shown that you're excellent at the Corsi forward and the Corsi backward, and so it looks like you should be up at a +2.
And you were.
And then you're performing like you're a -2 on this one.
Yeah, yeah. So
I wasn't performing consistently with age or with sex.
Yeah,
or with
yeah.
Okay.
So we got rid of it. And this is generally just shows when you put in an item, this is what you want. You want these nice separation curves, nicely ordered, so, you know, that you can see, this is the Corsi forward, that you can see a nice spread. So this is our distribution by age. This is, not by age, sorry, gender. So we have more men than women. This is everybody together, right? All time points together? Yeah.
So some people tested twice.
Some people tested twice, and that doesn't really matter here. It's you know, it's often done, and that's, you know, so you can see there's quite a difference between the men and women, and you can see, you know, but they're, you know, the distribution is not, there's some overlap, so there's not very many women at the top end. I'm not going to answer questions about whether this is statistically significant, because you will see it when we do the regression. This is by age, and you can see that the younger people is a nice dose response. The younger people scored 0.7. Next was 0.5.
So that's 18 to 44, 44,
Oh, yeah.
5 to
55.
Doesn't the inclusion 35 and up? Okay.
Well, we
35 to
just,
45.
yeah,
Okay.
we just make those categories.
All right.
There may not be, only 18 people are in there, yeah. So you see a very nice gradation by age. And you also see a standard
But what a
deviation.
nice gradation if you're older.
No, but I mean, sorry, you see a typical dose response. Yeah, an expected dose response. So this gives you little signals about is it performing as expected. This is by education. So this is a primary school, high school, college, BA, and then graduate school. So when you get graduate school, it dumbs you down a bit, right? You probably used up all your neurons.
Just as interacting with age at that point, right?
Yeah.
People are in their 60s by the time they get through graduate.
Yeah. So again, you have that expected distribution. This is by V. Oh, visits.
Version.
Yeah. So this is by visit 1, visit 2, and visit 3. Now, what's happening is that they're getting a little better between visit 1 and visit 2. Now, these are obviously, you know, this group has got people that only have 1 visit. What?
Cognitive training.
Yeah, there. Excellent.
Or maybe it's just meeting around.
Yeah.
To,
But we'll show you a slide later on where it's only the people that had 2 visits, and you can appreciate that.
okay.
This just shows, I mean, I think you have to be rash initiated to really like this, so we won't do these. We love these, everybody's oohing and eyeing. Okay, this shows the distribution between time 1 and time 2. This is the change value. So these are on the people who had 2 visits, and there was like 200 of them, I think. So the first thing, this is a stem and leaf plot. The first thing you need to identify is this is the 0 level. So and you can see here that the median is actually 0. So a lot of people did not change. Now, what we talk about, well, some people change. Well, I mean, yeah, but, you know, how much has changed? So one of the things when you don't have units of clinically meaningful change, we sometimes accept a half a standard deviation as, you know, an indication that that change is important. So our standard deviation was 0.46, that was our memory test. So anything, 0.458. So, you know, something that's like, you know, 0.23 of a standard deviation. So we have some people here. This actually, from here down, this is the quartile. So this is like 25% of people would have declined over time. We got some really high performers up here that really improved quite a lot.
All the ones in the cognitive training.
Yeah, all of them are. There's cognitive training going on. So we do have some people that have got worse. We have some people that have got better, but most people are sort of within, you know, I guess that kind of measurement error. That's not, you know, this would be our half a standard deviation in the 2s, right?
So that's good. It's implies there's not some massive practice effect that's shifting everybody.
No, there's a bit of practice effect or something. Maybe they had a bad day. I don't know. What the, you know, there could have been.
One variable that had a strong effect.
Okay, one of the.
I think it was recall.
Okay, the recall.
Recall.
Okay, interesting. So
But it still wasn't huge.
right. So I mean, you know, I guess we are interested, I mean, you never want to say, oh, isn't this great for us to define, but, you know, we're always interested in trying to understand what's going on here. This was the whole point of the project.
Right.
So we do have some people that define from time 1 to time 2, and so our whole project is to try to figure out who are these people. We're not there yet.
Next month.
Yeah, so this is more related to the means that I showed you, and are they statistically significant? Because you can't really test age without, you know, independent of education. Education in phase of age and gender, and so this is a model. This is done with a regression. So you can see that female scored in reference to men 0.29 of a logit lower, and it was highly significant because you got obviously, you know, several hundred people. Almost anything would be significant. But this is clinically meaningful. This was our test of a half a standard deviation. So this is a clinically relevant average difference between men and women scored significantly lower. Age, significant effect of age. Here we just did it by 10-year increment, and there's a significant effect. Every 10 years, it's almost clinically meaningful. So you can imagine every 15 years would definitely meet, you know, 0.3, but it's dose response. This is our education. We picked high school as a reference. You don't want to pick anything with a very small group of people in here. So there's nothing going on here. And you can start to see that once you're hitting university, postgraduate, you're performing meaningfully, clinically, meaningfully higher than people who are less than that, and it's also statistically significant. English and French, we did not have a huge difference. I mean, sample size, this is not necessarily clinically meaningful. It's approaching statistical significance, likely because of sample size. And with the more people you have, anything can be statistically significant. But
this was done only on the baseline visit, so there were about 500
okay.
records.
So that's good. So, you know, if we had our FAS in there, we could have said, yeah, that's really harder in French, but that item did go out. So, but you know, that isn't anything. Our province is always sensitive to that.
Well, the list learning might be, the verbal recall might be in language, because we tried to match the words,
right.
but they might not be exactly as difficult in English and in French. Yeah.
So one of the things that I think came up from a discussion between Mary Jose and Susan was that one of the reasons why women might have been so much lower than men. And I guess the hypothesis was drug use. So that was your hypothesis. Do you remember what your hypothesis was?
That the women were more substance users in our population than men.
And that substance users would not be good for their brain?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Or people who were not necessarily completely on top of things might be more likely to use substances.
Right.
We don't know the direction.
Right, exactly. Which came first?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what you do is it's a test of interaction. So what you do is you fit that you present the data as men using drugs and women using drugs. So if you pick men never use drugs as a reference, men who use drugs didn't make any difference. Men who use drugs in the past year didn't make any difference. So, you know, don't broadcast that widely. But, and of course, it's adjusted for age, education, language, and the site of administration. If you look at women, women who never use drugs are statistically very much lower than men who never use drugs. So, and then if they use drugs in the past year, this is the combined effect, right, of both gender and drugs.
Who used to use drugs were doing better, but the numbers, as you can see on the bottom, the numbers were very small.
Right.
Not many of the women had used drugs.
Right. Of the 76 women, 59 reported never using any drugs. So we're dealing with tens. But you know, it's a good question to ask about interaction, and it's a good, statistical exercise for your brain to interpret interaction.
There's also the question of whether women were more likely to be immigrants, recent immigrants.
And lower education.
Yeah, but it's adjusted for education. Yeah, and the ethnicity, we had very few, right? We abandoned that.
We looked at was
was like 4.
Language,
yeah.
But we neither English or French, and that was very low. I think there were only about 10.
Yes,
Because Canada's immigration policy prevents women from coming to speak English.
And so we looked at,
Bruce?
oh,
Yeah?
So did you look at the type of drug? I mean, I know that's difficult, but you've sort of lumped all drugs together, presuming they're homogeneous, and drugs like ice.
yeah.
Or we separate one of the more likely neurotoxic drugs like ice.
I think that was going to have to wait for the full sample to have
Yeah.
enough traction on
Yeah,
that.
and these are the exact sorts of things that we need to do with this data set. You know, this is really, you know, first cut of the pie. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, some pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics can go in there and give a list and absolutely.
We only have 10 or 20 women using drugs at all.
Yeah.
Right. We need more women using drugs to answer your question.
But yeah, it's important to tease it out.
Right.
And we will when we get to write the drug paper and I hear a volunteer for writing the drug paper. This is the CD4 count. And we played with a few sort of cutoffs, and my clinical people will tell me that I think that 0 to 250 is definitely not good. And yes, it's a little bit lower, not significantly so. You see there's quite a bit of variation in compared to 500 and higher. There's no continuous, this is the continuous effect. This is just if you put it in as a continuous variable.
I graded out because it did not fit linear criteria.
Oh, fine. It's not linear, so we're not going to want to do that. So the categories are fine because you're comparing each category to each other. This doesn't really do anything, and so, you know, and it's not quite meeting our criteria of clinically relevant. But it may be of interest, and there may be something.
And again, we have this, not a problem. I mean, we have a success story that's
there's nobody
in that category. That's a success of treatment. You know,
yeah, and that's excellent. That's really good.
Yeah.
This is Nadir's CD4. That's their low value, and there's really, you know, you look at the betas. There's really nothing going on there. And the continuous, it fit a linear model.
But it was a
Right.
reasonable rate.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's borderline univariate, but, you know, once you adjust it, it's not there. So, and you can see that this is not really very interesting. When you have missing data, just to point out what we often do when we have categorical data, is we don't exclude the missing data, we fit it as its own category. And then it allows you to see where would it go. Well, it's not different from anything else. So this would probably indicate missing at random and not some sort of influential missing. And I think this was in the same one. It's in the missing for this is in the same direction. This was the debate between age at diagnosis and time since, not age, current age and time since diagnosis, because obviously they're correlated. And so the Royal We, Susan Scott is here, the statistician, ran it with both in the model. And, you know, once you consider age, time since diagnosis drops out, and probably vice versa.
And even univariately.
And there's no, you see the signal's not there. Maybe this one is becoming close to our threshold of a half a standard deviation, but once you adjust for, this is years of diagnosis, once you adjust for age, it's disappeared. So it kind of indicates that it's mostly age. And I think that's it.
Super. Can we, so we kind of went over two things. One was the BPAN and what's in it and how we should maybe improve it, and the other was where the initial sort of first pass look at how it's doing, and that's in relation to demographics and the like. I don't know, maybe we should talk about the first question first, or at least get input. Laura, are you still there? I wonder if we could get your thoughts about or comments on, I mean, one thing we can do with the BCAN ongoing is add or subtract tasks. If we're going to add, it's not going to subtract. It sounds like we could already justify subtracting the things that aren't getting the model, potentially. But if we would like to add things, we want to add them where? At the higher end? Or we just want to start trying to tinker with adding tasks that are just a little bit less cumbersome, because some of these tasks, for what we gain from them, they're a bit cumbersome, and whether there might be better measures. Even the recall measure we have is sort of a nuisance, because it's kind of mimicking a clinical assessment where you talk to the patient as opposed to using the computer as a computer. I don't know, Laura, do you want to comment?
Yeah, so it's really interesting stuff. Thanks for having me be part of this meeting. So we've run not these exact tests, but a lot of these tests in very large samples that are on the web. So you get a very broad range of ability and people from very different demographics. And a lot of them, but you can't necessarily verify things about them. You sort of rely on self-report. So there's a little bit of messiness there. But the one thing that I noticed is the fact that you found the Corsi did particularly well, and we've actually found that too, that it's just generally a good test. And in the amount of time that it takes to administer, you get a lot of oomph for testing oomph, that being the technical term.
Right.
And then,
yeah.
What you found actually about trails, I think we've found kind of as well. It's a little bit of a rough measure, and it's kind of like a one-shot sort of deal. Recall, if your goal is to make this like a battery that can be done with minimal intervention by someone who's actually having to administer, I think recall is going to be kind of a struggle to do that with. So if it's not performing well anyway, or it's not really giving you that much, then I don't know.
Recall's giving us quite a lot. We like the idea of it. I'm just wondering if a different.
So look at recall.
Oh, I see. Maybe not.
It's all in the middle.
Yeah, that's where it's going to be.
And it's got dip issues.
Yeah.
They're
Dip
small,
issues.
so we have to left it as it was because.
I mean, the one good thing about recall is that patients feel like you're testing something that is a problem.
Yeah.
Got
face validity.
Yeah, so they feel like you're asking them something they should be able to do.
But doing something like recognition, like recognition memory instead of recall memory it's much easier to automate.
Right.
And you could then mess around with different words and different word pairs, whatever you want to do. So we've tended to rely on verbal recognition memory because it's so much easier to do on the web. And we still haven't figured out a good way of doing recall.
Have you done nonverbal recognition? Because the thing with verbal is we have multiple languages, well, at least French and English, and so we're trying to steer away from language if we can without jeopardizing our measurement.
Actually, the entire research program on Test My Brain came out of visual recognition memory.
Perfect.
So we had, for a while, that's all we did. We just, had houses and cars and horses and tools and, just visual recognition of everything. And then we went to abstract art and, weird, animal-like things that weren't actually animals. So we ran the whole gamut of that. The one thing we noticed, though, is that they do dissociate. So there's, a factor for visual and verbal recognition memory, but there is a definite difference between people who are good at the verbal side versus people who are good visually. So, and that's okay, but visual, for us, tends to dissociate more from your IQ-related cognitive ability measures. And that might be due to strategy-related things, like maybe it's harder to come up with a strategy for encoding a visual stimulus than it is a verbal stimulus. So that's been just something to consider. So if you're trying to look for one single latent factor that's related to cognitive ability.
We don't mind if there's more than one latent. It's just that so far we've only really found one that was robustly coming through in these HIV samples, the many HIV samples we've studied now.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, those tests tend to be, the ones we've had tend to be fairly sensitive and, they're much easier certainly than recall memory. As for the gender difference, I actually wasn't surprised by the gender difference you guys found at all. We find the same gender differences in these types of tests. We find the opposite gender difference in tests that rely more on verbal ability and social ability. So it's this, and then you get things like matrix reasoning, and I'm assuming Tower of London would be similar, where there's no gender difference at all. So as things go more spatial, it tends to be more, men tend to do better, males tend to do better. As things get more verbal and social, women tend to do better, whether it be socialization or whatever, But we find very consistent, 0.2, 0.3 SD differences between men and women in these different sets of tasks that come up again and again across many different types of tests, but in the same broad domain of social/verbal compared to spatial kind of things. So Corsi, I'm guessing, has a large gender difference, and that might not be as true for something like Like, well, the recall one, for example, I'm betting.
Well, we have DigitSpan. We just didn't survive in this list, but we have the data on DigitSpan. I thought we could look at that as a verbal versus nonverbal. It's supposed to be an analog of the course.
It's
Don't you
not.
think? You don't think so?
It's not.
All right.
Yeah.
That's what I teach the residents.
Show the functional dimension.
Well.
Just trying to find, don't you have a diff by gender?
So that's interesting. So because we steered away from verbal because of our bilingual problem or our bilingual advantage, depending on how you look at it. But anyway, those constraints that if we could come up with things that weren't verbal and not lose capturing the latent construct, but maybe we are. I mean, we don't know what the construct is exactly.
That's the problem.
There's this general thing where the cognitive tests that are more language and culture bound are the ones that women tend to do better at. And the ones that are more language and culture independent, like,
Okay.
I mean, for whatever reason, again, like, you know, sort of acausal kind of, this is just what the data look like. Those,
I mean, we don't. In a way, we don't really care as long as we're still spreading people out appropriately, and it's not somehow mucking up the measurements. The fact that women come in lower, as long as we can measure their change or whatever, this might be a confidence issue, self-esteem, but it doesn't have to be a problem.
It's only a problem if HIV itself differentially influences these different abilities.
Right, which we don't have any particular reason to think. I mean, we don't know what the causes are, but as far as we can tell, maybe Bruce will tell me otherwise, there's not a reason to think that a very specific domain ought to be preferentially affected. As far as I know. Yeah, but at least we're working under the assumption that it's not a sort of domain deficit, like you could sort of make an argument, at least at the beginning in certain dementias, they start off predominantly verbal or predominantly social or whatever, whereas it doesn't seem that clear, at least to me, that's the case in HIV, maybe because it's kind of a mixed bag, so if there's domain specificity, it's getting washed out by other things that are domain specific, or maybe it's because it's like MS and other things, it's kind of a non-specific degradation, chronic brain failure kind of phenotype.
Yeah.
I don't know.
At a really conceptual level, it could be that people with HIV, as you say, they're heterogeneous enough in terms of the cognitive impact. They each break down in slightly different ways. And when you put them all together and try to look at them as a group, the things that you're going to see that come through consistently are the kinds of cognitive domains that sort of undercut multiple domains,
right.
Because that's the problem with cognition, is it is hierarchical.
It's hierarchical and distributed. Okay. So, Laura, do you think we should, I mean, we had in mind, or you and I talked anyway, about the idea of just going ahead and dumping a couple of tasks, pulling a couple of tasks out of your, I guess, going into your system and giving a couple of tasks. We can do that together with the BCAM we're running now to test whether those tasks might be suitable.
Absolutely, and in fact, I mean, I don't know how much you want to continue to do your rash model analysis on other data sets, but the tests that we have, many of them, we've got like thousands of people worth of data. So if there's like a informed way to select those tests,
right.
Based on how we were already doing things.
Yeah, I suppose if you have things like the Corsi and so on, and that's close enough to what we have, can we do some kind of cross-linking? If we have people if she has data that includes people who've done the Corsi and a couple of these other tasks potentially. Do most people do more than one, or you just have one task at a time?
So people will do it'll typically be 2 or 3, and we'll have those 2 or 3 be selected based on like a particular hypothesis or validation kind of need or something. And so we have the ability to, for instance, I'm trying to think, like we've done Corsi and a processing speed test, I'm almost certain of. But we have a flanker test, we have a Corsi type test, we have trails, we have working memory. So like compare a few of those and see if the structure is similar to what you guys are finding. I don't know. Well, I mean, if we don't have the data, we could get the data relatively quickly.
Okay. That sounds good. I mean, I think we should move ahead with that. I think we should, if we can, take advantage of your hard-won experience with some of these tasks, because for us it's a slow process to get more data, relatively speaking. So
our bottleneck has always been data analysis, because we end up with just the traffic to the site. We end up getting lots of data, but then like there's only so many hours in the day.
So,
So,
the papers. Our analysts produce a analysis, and we can't write it up as fast as they can.
Okay, we could try to help remove that bottleneck
Yeah.
to the paper writing stage, so we can feel even more regretful about
Yeah.
the fact that the work is so close to being done. Okay. Okay.
So are you suggesting verifying the hierarchy on that data? On this
Well,
data of people that are relatively normal? Do they have some health condition this week?
No, this is random people on the internet,
Like
so mostly
typical
healthy.
values?
So they would give us typical values that would be
Right.
useful potentially.
So if we took a random sample of 400 people?
Anyway, potentially we could talk more about
Yeah.
that separately, but that might be one way, as you say, to choose rather than just choosing arbitrarily somewhat. Or we could choose based on your impression of the psychometric features, I guess.
But it also would give us typical values
Yeah.
to compare our group, because that's one of the things, I mean, I'm sure some of these things do have norms, but I always find them highly suspicious.
Don't question the norms in neuropsychology. We're going to get into
No.
kind of fist fight. That's not here.
Good thing. But, you know, you got a couple of million people or 1.5 million people that answer the question, you know, there's safety in numbers. You know, trim the tails, right?
Trim the tail. Okay. Do we need to talk about the other stuff? Bruce, do you have any more?
Oh, he's gone.
He's gone.
What about Haikun? Is Haikun still here?
She didn't hear,
Oh,
so she's on vacation.
okay.
And I will send her the video, and
Okay.
Sean and Matthew just left.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, we're past our hour.
Our hour.
So thanks a lot for joining in, Laura, since you're the remaining person. I kept you on the line so you wouldn't leave. We can maybe set up a time to talk more practically
Yeah.
in the near-ish
yeah,
future.
that would be great. And Jeremy Wilmer, he wanted to be here, but as he emailed me, he had a kerfuffle. I'm not really sure what that was, but.
Okay, well, I hope everything's okay.
But then again, I think
Yeah,
he
don't
really
put it in the
loved the interview, so,
Okay.
anyway.
Thanks. It was nice to
Thank you
meet
for
you.
joining. That's pretty
Very
impressive.
nice.
Okay. She is a postdoc. If you look up, actually, can you go to it's called testmybrain.org?
I did some of them.